Sarah Martinez sat quietly in the corner booth of Murphy's Diner, her dark eyes scanning the room with the practiced awareness of someone who had spent years in dangerous places. At 32, she looked like any other woman enjoying a late dinner after work. Her brown hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore jeans and a navy blue sweater that hid the lean muscle beneath. Nothing about her appearance suggested that she had spent the last 8 years as a Navy SEAL, one of the most elite warriors in the American military. The diner was busy for a Thursday night. Families occupied several tables, their conversations mixing with the clatter of dishes and the soft hum of an old jukebox playing classic rock. Sarah had chosen this place because it reminded her of home, of the small town in Texas where she had grown up dreaming of serving her country. The smell of coffee and apple pie filled the air, creating a warmth that helped ease the tension she still carried from her recent deployment. Sarah had returned from Afghanistan just 3 months ago. The transition back to civilian life was harder than any mission she had completed overseas. In the field, everything was clear. There were objectives to complete, teammates to protect, and enemies to defeat. Back home, the rules were different and much less defined. She was taking time to figure out what came next, living off her savings while she decided whether to continue her military career or try something new. Tonight was supposed to be peaceful. She had spent the day at the Veterans Affairs office, working through paperwork and meeting with a counselor who specialized in helping special operations soldiers adjust to civilian life. The conversation had been difficult, bringing up memories she preferred to keep buried. Sarah needed the quiet comfort of a good meal and familiar surroundings to clear her head. She was halfway through her burger when she noticed the group of men at the table across the room. There were 4 of them, all in their 20s, loud and clearly drunk. They had been making increasingly rude comments to the teenage waitress who was trying to serve them. Sarah watched as the girl's face grew red with embarrassment each time they called her over, only to make inappropriate jokes and crude suggestions. The waitress, who could not have been older than 17, was doing her best to stay professional. Sarah could see her hands shaking slightly as she refilled their coffee cups, trying to ignore their lewd comments about her appearance. The manager, an older man with gray hair, kept glancing over nervously but seemed afraid to confront the group directly. Sarah felt her jaw tighten as she watched the scene unfold. During her years in the military, she had seen too many situations where bullies used their size and numbers to intimidate those who could not fight back. It was the kind of behavior that went against everything she believed in. The strong were supposed to protect the weak, not prey on them. One of the men, a large guy with blonde hair and arms covered in tattoos, grabbed the waitress's wrist as she tried to walk past their table. "Where you going, sweetheart? We're not done talking to you yet." His grip was tight enough that Sarah could see the girl wince in pain. "Please let me go," the waitress said quietly, looking around desperately for help. "I have other tables to serve." "What's the rush?" Another man laughed, this one skinny with a beard that needed trimming. "We're good customers. We tip well for good service." The way he said "good service" made Sarah's stomach turn. The other customers in the diner were pretending not to notice, suddenly, very interested in their own meals. Sarah understood their fear. The 4 men were big and aggressive, clearly looking for trouble. Most people would avoid getting involved in a situation that could turn dangerous quickly. But Sarah was not most people. She had spent years training for situations exactly like this, though usually the stakes were much higher and the setting was a battlefield rather than a small-town diner. The principles were the same, however. When innocent people were being threatened, someone had to step up and do what was right. Sarah quietly placed her napkin on the table and stood up. Her movements were calm and controlled, giving no hint of the training that had made her one of the most lethal soldiers in the world. She walked slowly toward the group's table, her hands relaxed at her sides. "Excuse me," she said politely, her voice carrying just enough authority to get their attention. "I think you should let her go." The 4 men turned to look at her, their expressions ranging from amusement to annoyance. The blond man, who was clearly their leader, looked Sarah up and down with a smirk. Well, looks like we got ourselves a hero. You want to join the party, honey? I want you to release her wrist and let her do her job," Sarah replied calmly. She had learned long ago that staying calm in confrontational situations was often the best way to de-escalate them. "She's just trying to work." The man's grip on the waitress tightened. Mind your own business, lady. This doesn't concern you. Sarah took a half step closer, her posture still relaxed, but her eyes hardening slightly. Actually, it does concern me. You're making everyone in here uncomfortable, including me. Let her go, finish your meal, and leave quietly. Everyone goes home happy. The bearded man stood up, swaying slightly from the alcohol. Or what? What are you going to do about it? Nothing, if you make the smart choice, Sarah said. She could see the manager reaching for what was probably the phone to call the police, but she doubted they would arrive in time to help the waitress. But if you keep this up, I promise you'll regret it. The room had gone completely silent. Even the jukebox seemed to have stopped playing, though that was probably Sarah's imagination. Every eye in the diner was focused on the confrontation, waiting to see what would happen next. The blonde man finally released the waitress's wrist and stood up, towering over Sarah by at least 6 inches. You got a big mouth for such a little girl. Maybe you need someone to teach you some manners. Sarah felt the familiar calm that always settled over her before action. Her heart rate remained steady, her breathing controlled. This was the moment when most people would back down, apologize, and walk away. She was not most people. Last chance, she said quietly. Walk away. Instead of walking away, the man took a step forward, invading Sarah's personal space in an obvious attempt to intimidate her. His 3 friends were getting to their feet as well, forming a semicircle around her. The waitress had backed away toward the kitchen, her eyes wide with fear. You know what I think, the blonde man said, his alcohol-tainted breath hot against Sarah's face. I think you need to learn when to keep your mouth shut. What happened next took less than 3 seconds, but, for everyone watching, it seemed to unfold in slow motion. The man raised his hand as if to shove Sarah backward. Before his fingers could make contact with her shoulder, she moved. Sarah's left hand shot up and caught his wrist, her grip like a steel trap. At the same time, her right hand struck upward, the heel of her palm connecting with his nose with a wet cracking sound. Blood immediately began pouring down his face as he staggered backward, more surprised than hurt. You crazy, he started to yell, but Sarah was not finished. She pivoted on her left foot and drove her right elbow into his solar plexus, knocking the wind out of him and dropping him to his knees. The entire exchange had taken perhaps 2 seconds, and the man's 3 friends were still processing what they had just seen. Jake, the bearded man yelled, stepping towards Sarah with his fists raised. He swung a wild haymaker at her head, but she ducked under it easily and swept his legs, sending him crashing into an empty table. Dishes scattered across the floor with a tremendous crash. The third man, shorter but stocky with arms like tree trunks, tried to grab Sarah from behind. She sensed his approach and spun around, her knee coming up to connect with his stomach. As he doubled over in pain, she grabbed the back of his head and brought it down to meet her rising knee. He collapsed in a heap, unconscious before he hit the floor. The fourth man, the smartest of the group, had backed away toward the door. This is crazy, he muttered, looking around at his fallen friends. She's crazy. Sarah turned to face him, not even breathing hard despite having just taken down 3 grown men in less than 10 seconds. Your friends will be fine, she said calmly. But if I were you, I'd get them out of here before the police arrive. The man nodded frantically and began helping the blonde leader to his feet. Blood was still flowing freely from his broken nose, and he was having trouble focusing his eyes. Come on, Jake. We need to go. She sucker punched me, Jake mumbled, still disoriented from the blow to his face. Little witch sucker punched me. Yeah, well, maybe you shouldn't have tried to hit a woman, his friend replied, half dragging him toward the door. The bearded man was beginning to stir, groaning as he tried to sit up among the broken dishes. The stocky man remained unconscious. Sarah walked back to her table and calmly resumed eating her burger as if nothing had happened. Around the diner, conversation slowly began to resume, though most people were still staring at her in amazement. The waitress approached cautiously, her eyes still wide with shock. Are you okay? Sarah asked, looking up at the girl with genuine concern. Am I okay? The waitress laughed nervously. You just beat up 4 guys. Are you okay? Sarah smiled for the first time all evening. I'm fine. Are you hurt? Did he hurt your wrist? The girl flexed her fingers experimentally. It's a little sore, but nothing serious. I can't believe you did that. How did you? I mean, Where did you learn to fight like that? Military training, Sarah said simply, not wanting to go into details about exactly what kind of military training. Are you sure you're all right? Before the waitress could answer, the manager appeared at their table. His face was pale, and his hands were shaking slightly as he set down a fresh cup of coffee for Sarah. Miss, I don't know how to thank you. Those guys have been coming in here for weeks, causing trouble. We've called the police before, but they always leave before anyone shows up. You don't need to thank me, Sarah replied. I just did what anyone should do. The manager shook his head. No, most people would have minded their own business. What you did took real courage. He paused, studying Sarah's face more carefully. You said military training. What branch, if you don't mind me asking? Navy, Sarah said, keeping her answer vague. She had learned to be careful about revealing too much about her background. Most people had strong reactions when they learned she had been a SEAL, and she was not in the mood for questions about what it was like being a woman in such an elite unit. The manager nodded respectfully. Well, your meal is on the house tonight. And if you ever need anything when you're in town, just let me know. Name's Bill Murphy. My family has owned this place for 30 years. I appreciate that, Mr. Murphy, but you don't need to. I insist, he said firmly. And I meant what I said about anything you need. You've got friends here now. As Bill walked away, Sarah felt some of the tension she had been carrying begin to ease. For the first time since returning from Afghanistan, she felt useful again. She had protected someone who needed protection, stood up to bullies who thought they could do whatever they wanted without consequences. The bearded man had finally gotten to his feet and was helping his unconscious friend toward the door. Both of them kept glancing back at Sarah nervously, as if expecting her to attack them again. She ignored them, focusing on her meal and the feeling of satisfaction that came from doing the right thing. The waitress, whose name tag read Emma, brought Sarah a slice of apple pie without being asked. Bill said to bring you this, she explained. And I wanted to say thank you again. Those guys have been harassing me for weeks. My boss was afraid to do anything because they spend a lot of money here. Sometimes spending money doesn't give you the right to treat people badly, Sarah said. No one should have to put up with that kind of behavior at work. Emma nodded enthusiastically. I've been saving up for college, and I really need this job. But I was starting to think about quitting because of them. I was scared they might follow me to my car one night or something. The comment sent a chill through Sarah. She had not considered that the harassment might have escalated beyond the confines of the diner. Men who were willing to publicly grab and intimidate a young woman were often capable of much worse when they thought no one was watching. Have they ever followed you before? Sarah asked, her voice taking on a harder edge. Emma shook her head quickly. No, nothing like that. But the way they looked at me sometimes. She shuddered slightly. It made me really uncomfortable. Sarah made a mental note to pay attention to the local news over the next few days. Men like those four rarely learned their lesson from a single confrontation, especially when alcohol was involved. There was a good chance they would blame her for embarrassing them and look for some way to get revenge. For now, though, the immediate threat was over. The diner was returning to normal, families finishing their meals and couples sharing dessert. The teenage boy who had been watching from a corner table approached Sarah nervously, clearly working up the courage to speak. Excuse me, miss, he said quietly. I just wanted to say that was really cool what you did. Those guys were jerks. Sarah smiled at him. Thank you. But, remember, violence should always be a last resort. I tried talking to them first. The boy nodded seriously, as if he was memorizing her words. My mom always says we should stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves. But she also says to be smart about it. Your mom sounds like a wise woman, Sarah replied. What's your name? Tommy. Tommy Chun. My parents own the Chinese restaurant down the street. Well, Tommy Chun, you seem like a good kid. Keep listening to your mom, okay? Tommy grinned and hurried back to his table, where his parents were waiting with proud smiles on their faces. Sarah realized that she had just become a minor celebrity in this small town, which was not necessarily a good thing. She preferred to keep a low profile, especially given her military background. As she finished her pie and prepared to leave, Sarah reflected on how different this evening had turned out from what she had expected. She had come here looking for peace and quiet, a chance to process her difficult day at the VA office. Instead, she had found herself in a physical confrontation that reminded her of why she had joined the military in the first place. The need to protect others, to stand between innocent people and those who would harm them, was still as strong as ever. Maybe stronger, now that she had seen how many people were willing to look the other way when confronted with injustice. Sarah left a generous tip for Emma and headed toward the door. As she reached for the handle, Bill Murphy appeared at her side. "Miss, I hope we'll see you again soon," he said warmly. "And I meant what I said about having friends here. This is a good town with good people, but sometimes we need someone to remind us how to be brave." "I'm sure I'll be back," Sarah replied. "And Mr. Murphy, you might want to consider hiring security for the evening shift. Guys like that don't usually give up after one confrontation." Bill's expression grew serious. "You think they might come back?" "I think they're angry and embarrassed, which can be a dangerous combination. Just keep an eye out, okay?" As Sarah walked to her car, she could not shake the feeling that tonight was just the beginning of something larger. She had made enemies tonight, men who would not soon forget being humiliated by a woman half their size. In her experience, such men rarely accepted defeat gracefully. The parking lot was well lit and empty except for a few other vehicles. Sarah's truck, a reliable Ford pickup that had served her well since leaving the service, was parked near the back corner where she always positioned it for a quick exit if necessary. Old habits from dangerous places died hard. As she unlocked the door, Sarah heard footsteps behind her. Her hand instinctively moved toward the knife clipped to her belt, but she relaxed when she saw it was just Emma, the waitress from the diner. "I'm sorry to bother you," Emma said breathlessly, as if she had run to catch up. "I just wanted to give you this." She held out a folded piece of paper. Sarah took the paper and unfolded it to find a phone number written in neat handwriting. "What's this for?" "It's my number," Emma explained. "I know this might sound weird, but would you mind if I called you sometime? I mean, not for anything romantic or anything like that. I've never met anyone like you before. Someone so strong and brave. I could use a friend like that." Sarah studied the young woman's face and saw genuine admiration there, mixed with a lingering fear from the evening's events. She remembered being Emma's age and feeling powerless in the face of larger, more aggressive people. Having a mentor during those years might have changed everything. "Sure," Sarah said, tucking the paper into her pocket. "But, Emma, what happened tonight isn't something I want to make a habit of, okay? Violence should always be the last option." Emma nodded eagerly. "I understand. I want to learn how to be strong like that. Not to hurt people, but to not be afraid all the time." "Being brave doesn't mean not being afraid," Sarah said gently. "It means doing what's right even when you are afraid. You were brave tonight too, you know. You kept doing your job, even though those men were harassing you. That took courage." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Thank you for everything." As Sarah drove home through the quiet streets, she reflected on the unexpected turn her evening had taken. She had been struggling with questions about her future, wondering if her military skills had any value in civilian life. Tonight had provided a clear answer. There would always be situations where her training could protect innocent people. The question was whether she wanted to actively seek out such situations or simply respond when they found her. Her years as a SEAL had taught her that sometimes the right thing to do was to find the fight before it found you. But that was a decision for tomorrow. Tonight, she was content knowing that Emma would go home safe, that the other customers in the diner had seen that bullies could be stood up to, and that she had remembered what it felt like to make a difference. As she pulled into the driveway of the small apartment she had rented on the outskirts of town, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from her former commanding officer, Colonel James Harrison, the man who had recommended her for SEAL training 8 years ago. "Heard through the grapevine you're back stateside. Hope you're adjusting well. We could use someone with your skills on a new project. Interested in talking." Sarah stared at the message for a long moment before putting the phone away without responding. She was not ready to go back to that world yet, not ready to make decisions about her future based on one evening's events. But, as she lay in bed that night, replaying the confrontation at the diner, Sarah could not help but wonder if this was exactly the kind of sign she had been waiting for. Maybe the question was not whether her skills were still relevant, but how she could use them to make the biggest difference. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions to make about her future. Tonight, she was content knowing she had done the right thing and that somewhere across town, a young waitress was sleeping safely because someone had been willing to stand up for her. It was a good feeling, one Sarah had not experienced since leaving Afghanistan. Perhaps coming home did not have to mean leaving the mission behind after all. 3 days had passed since the incident at Murphy's Diner, and Sarah Martinez was beginning to think she had overestimated the threat posed by the 4 men she had confronted. The local news had been quiet, with no reports of retaliation or escalated violence. Maybe they had learned their lesson after all, or perhaps they had simply decided to take their business elsewhere. Sarah was beginning to settle into a routine in the small town of Millbrook. She had found a decent gym where she could maintain her physical conditioning, discovered a library with a surprisingly good selection of military history books, and had even started volunteering at the local Veterans Center 2 afternoons a week. It felt good to have a purpose again, even if it was different from the high-stakes missions she had grown accustomed to overseas. On Saturday morning, Sarah was completing her usual 5-mile run through the residential neighborhoods when her phone buzzed with an incoming call. She slowed to a walk and checked the screen, recognizing Emma's number immediately. "Good morning, Emma," she answered, still catching her breath from the run. "Sarah?" Emma's voice was shaky, barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry to call so early, but I think I'm in trouble." Sarah immediately stopped walking, every sense alert. "What kind of trouble? Where are you?" "I'm at home, but there's someone outside my house. A truck has been parked across the street for the last 2 hours, and I think it's one of those guys from the other night. The big blonde one with the broken nose." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. She had hoped the confrontation at the diner would end the matter, but apparently, Jake and his friends were not as smart as she had given them credit for. "Are you alone in the house?" "Yes, my parents went to visit my aunt in the city for the weekend. They won't be back until tonight." "Sarah, I'm really scared. What if he tries to come in?" "He won't," Sarah said firmly, already turning back toward her apartment. "But I want you to do exactly what I tell you, okay? First, make sure all your doors and windows are locked. Second, stay away from the windows where he might be able to see you. Third, call the police and report a suspicious vehicle. Don't mention the diner incident unless they ask directly." "Okay," Emma said, sounding slightly calmer. "Should I call you back after I talk to the police?" "Yes, but Emma, if that truck moves, or if you see him getting out of the vehicle, call 911 immediately. Don't worry about bothering me. Just call." Sarah ended the call and broke into a sprint back toward her apartment. She had left her truck parked at home during her run, and she needed to get there quickly. As she ran, her mind was already working through the tactical situation. If Jake was indeed watching Emma's house, it represented a significant escalation from the diner confrontation. This was now clearly harassment with the potential for much worse. The fact that he had waited until Emma was alone suggested this was planned rather than impulsive. That made Jake more dangerous than Sarah had initially assessed. Drunk and stupid she could handle easily. Sober and calculating required a different approach. Sarah reached her apartment in record time and immediately began preparing for what might become a dangerous situation. She changed out of her running clothes into dark jeans and a black long-sleeved shirt. Her service pistol, a Sig Sauer P226 that had been her constant companion throughout her military career, went into a concealed holster at her waist. A tactical knife clipped to her belt, and a small can of pepper spray in her front pocket completed her equipment. As she was locking her apartment door, Sarah's phone rang again. Emma's number appeared on the screen. "What's the situation?" Sarah asked without preamble. "The police came by about 20 minutes ago," Emma said, sounding more confident than before. "They said they would patrol the area more frequently today, but they can't make him leave unless he's actually on our property or threatening me directly. The truck is still there, and I think he saw the police car because he ducked down when they drove by." Sarah was not surprised by the police response. Technically, sitting in a truck on a public street was not illegal, even if the intent was clearly to intimidate someone. The law required proof of actual threats or trespassing before officers could take action. "Did you tell them about what happened at the diner?" "No. I figured that would just complicate things." "But, Sarah, what if he's waiting for dark? What if he tries to break in tonight?" The fear in Emma's voice was genuine, and Sarah felt her protective instincts kicking into high gear. This girl had been through enough trauma already. She deserved to feel safe in her own home. "That's not going to happen," Sarah said with absolute conviction. "I'm coming over. What's your address?" Emma provided the address, which Sarah recognized as being in one of the nicer residential neighborhoods about 10 minutes from downtown. As she drove through the quiet suburban streets, Sarah's mind was analyzing different approaches to the situation. The direct approach would be to confront Jake immediately and make it clear that his harassment needed to stop. But that might escalate the situation unnecessarily and could potentially put Emma in more danger later. A surveillance approach might allow her to gather more information about Jake's intentions and possibly catch him in the act of doing something clearly illegal. Sarah decided on a middle course. She would assess the situation firsthand, ensure Emma's immediate safety, and then determine the best way to deal with Jake permanently. Emma's house was a modest 2-story home on a tree-lined street, the kind of neighborhood where people knew their neighbors and children played safely in front yards. Sarah could immediately spot the truck that Emma had described, a large black pickup with tinted windows parked directly across from the house with a clear view of the front door and most of the windows. Rather than parking nearby where Jake might notice her, Sarah continued past the house and turned at the next corner. She found a parking spot 2 blocks away and approached Emma's house on foot, using the tree cover and neighboring houses to stay out of sight. The tactical training that had been drilled into her during years of special operations was second nature now. Move quietly, stay in cover, assess the threat before taking action. The suburban neighborhood was very different from the mountains of Afghanistan, but the principles remained the same. Sarah positioned herself behind a large oak tree in the yard next to Emma's house, where she had a clear view of both Jake's truck and Emma's front door. From this angle, she could see Jake clearly through the truck's windshield. He was awake and alert, occasionally checking his phone but keeping his eyes focused on the house. More concerning was what Sarah observed over the next 20 minutes. Jake was not just sitting in his truck randomly. He was taking notes in a small notebook, recording the times when Emma appeared at different windows and documenting which rooms she spent time in. This was not impulsive harassment. This was surveillance, possibly in preparation for something much worse. Sarah felt a cold anger building in her chest. She had seen this kind of behavior before, in different contexts overseas. It was the behavior of someone planning an attack, gathering intelligence about their target's patterns and vulnerabilities. Her phone vibrated with a text message from Emma. "He's writing stuff down." "That's not normal, is it?" Sarah quickly typed back, "Stay away from the windows. I'm outside and have eyes on him. You're safe." The response came back immediately. "You're here? Where?" "Close enough. Trust me." Sarah spent another 10 minutes observing Jake's behavior, confirming her suspicions that this was planned harassment rather than a random act of intimidation. When she was satisfied that she understood the threat level, she made her decision. Moving carefully through the tree cover, Sarah made her way around the block until she was approaching Jake's truck from behind. Her years of training in urban warfare had taught her how to move silently through different terrain, and the suburban neighborhood posed no particular challenge. Jake was so focused on watching Emma's house that he never saw Sarah coming. She approached the truck from the passenger side, staying in his blind spot until she was close enough to act. In one smooth motion, she opened the passenger door and slid into the seat next to him. Jake nearly jumped out of his skin, spinning around to face her with his mouth hanging open in shock. His notebook fell to the floor of the truck, and Sarah could see several pages of handwritten notes about Emma's movements. "Hello, Jake," Sarah said calmly, as if they were old friends meeting for coffee. "We need to talk." "What the? How did you get out of my truck?" Jake stammered, reaching for the door handle. Sarah's hand shot out and caught his wrist before he could open the door. Her grip was firm enough to get his attention without causing actual pain. "I don't think so. We have some things to discuss first." Jake tried to pull his hand free, but Sarah's grip was like steel. "You can't just get in someone's car. That's breaking and entering or something." The door was unlocked, Sarah pointed out reasonably. "And since you've been sitting here for hours watching a teenage girl's house and taking notes about her daily routine, I think we're in a bit of a gray area legally speaking." Jake's face went pale as he realized she had seen the notebook. "I wasn't doing anything wrong. It's a free country. I can park wherever I want." Sarah picked up the notebook from the floor and flipped through the pages. Jake's handwriting was surprisingly neat for someone she had pegged as barely literate. The notes were detailed and specific. "Target appears at kitchen window 8:15 a.m. Moves to upstairs window 8:30 a.m. Front door opens briefly 9 a.m. to check mail. No adult supervision observed. This is very interesting reading, Sarah said, keeping her voice conversational. It reads like a surveillance report. You know what we called guys who wrote reports like this in Afghanistan? We called them enemy combatants. And you know what we did to enemy combatants who were planning attacks on innocent people? Jake's bravado was crumbling rapidly. I wasn't planning anything. I was just watching. That's all. Just watching, Sarah repeated. Like a predator watches its prey before it strikes. Tell me, Jake, what were you planning to do with all this information? Were you going to wait until her parents were gone longer? Maybe break in when she was asleep? No, it wasn't like that. Jake protested, but the sweat beading on his forehead suggested otherwise. I just wanted to scare her a little. You embarrassed me in front of all those people. I wanted to get even. Sarah studied his face carefully, using the interrogation skills she had learned during her military training. Fear was the dominant emotion she saw, but there was also anger and humiliation. Men like Jake, when cornered, could become extremely dangerous. Here's what's going to happen, Sarah said, her voice taking on the tone of absolute authority she had used to command soldiers in combat. You're going to start this truck, drive away from this neighborhood, and never come back. You're not going to contact Emma, harass her, or go anywhere near her place of work. If I even suspect you're still bothering her, I will make your life very unpleasant. Do you understand? Jake nodded quickly, eager to agree to anything that would get him out of this situation. Yeah, okay. I understand. I'll leave her alone. I don't think you do understand, Sarah continued, tightening her grip on his wrist just enough to make him wince. Let me be more specific. If I hear that Emma has been harassed, threatened, or made to feel unsafe in any way, I will assume it was you. And I will come looking for you. When I find you, I won't be as gentle as I was at the diner. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. You have no idea what I'm capable of, Jake. What you saw the other night was me being nice. You don't want to see me when I'm not being nice. Jake was trembling now, and Sarah could smell the fear sweat on him. I get it, okay? I'll stay away from her. I'll stay away from the whole town if you want. Sarah released his wrist and picked up the notebook. I'm keeping this. Consider it evidence of your intentions, in case I need to share it with the police later. She slipped the notebook into her jacket pocket and opened the passenger door. Drive away now, Jake. Don't stop, don't look back, and don't ever let me see you in this town again. Jake started the truck with shaking hands and pulled away from the curb so quickly that his tires squealed against the asphalt. Sarah watched until his truck disappeared around the corner, then walked back toward Emma's house. Before she could knock on the front door, it opened and Emma appeared, her face pale but relieved. Is he gone? I saw his truck leave really fast. He's gone, Sarah confirmed. And he won't be coming back. Emma's eyes widened as she took in Sarah's appearance, noting the tactical clothing and the purposeful way she carried herself. How do you know for sure? Because I had a conversation with him that I think he'll remember for a very long time, Sarah said simply. Can we talk inside? I want to make sure you understand how to stay safe in case there are any other problems. Emma led her into a comfortable living room decorated with family photos and the kind of furniture that suggested a middle-class family that had lived here for many years. Sarah positioned herself where she could see the street through the front window, a habit that had kept her alive in much more dangerous places. What did you say to him? Emma asked, curling up in a chair across from the couch where Sarah sat. I explained that harassing you would have serious consequences, Sarah replied. But, Emma, I need you to understand something important. Men like Jake don't always learn their lessons the first time. He might be too scared to bother you directly, but he could try to get back at you in other ways. Emma's relief began to fade, replaced by concern. What kind of other ways? He might try to damage your car, or spread rumors about you, or get his friends to harass you instead. Or he might wait a few months until he thinks I'm not watching anymore, and try this again. Sarah pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found what she was looking for. I want you to save this number. It's for a friend of mine who works private security. If Jake or his friends bother you again, or if you just feel unsafe for any reason, call this number and mention my name. Someone will respond immediately. Emma saved the contact information, but Sarah could see that she was beginning to realize the full scope of what she had gotten involved in. Sarah, who are you really? I mean, I know you said military, but the way you handled those guys at the diner. And now this, you're not just regular military, are you? Sarah had been expecting this question. Emma was smart, and the events of the past few days had given her plenty of clues that Sarah was not just another veteran trying to adjust to civilian life. I was Navy Special Operations, Sarah said carefully. My job was to handle situations that required a very specific set of skills. The details aren't important, but what matters is that I know how to protect people and I know how to deal with threats. Special Operations, Emma repeated slowly. Like Navy SEALs? Sarah's silence was answer enough. Emma's eyes went wide as the implications sank in. Wow. No wonder those guys didn't stand a chance. Emma was quiet for a moment, processing this information. But why did you help me? I mean, you could have just ignored what was happening at the diner. The question touched on something Sarah had been thinking about a lot since returning from Afghanistan. Why had she gotten involved? What was it about Emma's situation that had prompted her to act when she could have easily minded her own business? Because someone needs to stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves, Sarah said finally. And because I've seen what happens in places where the strong prey on the weak, and no one does anything to stop it. It doesn't end well. Emma nodded solemnly. My dad always says that evil wins when good people do nothing. Your dad sounds like a smart man, Sarah replied. When do your parents get back? Around 6 tonight. Should I tell them what happened? Sarah considered the question carefully. Emma's parents deserved to know their daughter had been in danger, but they also deserved to know that the threat had been handled. Tell them what happened, but make sure they understand that Jake won't be bothering you anymore. And if they want to talk to me, I'm willing to meet with them. They'll want to thank you, Emma said. My mom is going to want to invite you over for dinner every night for the next year. Sarah smiled. That's not necessary, but I appreciate the thought. They spent another hour talking about safety precautions Emma should take, including varying her routine, staying aware of her surroundings, and trusting her instincts if something felt wrong. Sarah also gave her some basic self-defense tips, though she emphasized that avoiding dangerous situations was always better than fighting your way out of them. As she was preparing to leave, Emma walked her to the door. Sarah, can I ask you something personal? Sure. Do you miss it? Being a SEAL, I mean. The excitement and the danger and knowing that what you were doing really mattered. The question hit closer to home than Emma probably realized. Sarah had been struggling with exactly that issue since returning from her final deployment. How do you transition from a job where life and death decisions were made daily to a world where the biggest challenges were deciding what to have for lunch? Some parts of it, Sarah admitted. I miss knowing that my skills were being used to protect people who needed protection. I miss the sense of purpose that comes from being part of something bigger than yourself. But you used those skills to protect me, Emma pointed out. And you probably saved other people at the diner from being harassed in the future. Doesn't that count for something? Sarah looked at this teenage girl who had somehow managed to see something that Sarah herself had been missing. Maybe the skills she had learned during 8 years of military service did not have to be left behind when she took off the uniform. Maybe there were other ways to serve and protect that did not require deployment to foreign countries. You know what, Emma? It absolutely counts for something. Thank you for reminding me of that. As Sarah drove home, she found herself thinking about her conversation with Emma and the events of the past few days. For the first time since leaving the military, she felt like she had a clear sense of direction. Her skills were still needed, just in a different context. Her phone buzzed with another text from Colonel Harrison. Still interested in that conversation? Position involves domestic operations, protecting people who need protection. Might be right up your alley. This time, Sarah responded immediately, very interested. When can we talk? The response came back within minutes. How about tomorrow afternoon? I'll send you an address. Sarah smiled as she pulled into her driveway. Maybe coming home did not mean leaving the mission behind after all. Maybe it just meant finding a new way to serve. That evening, as she was preparing dinner, Sarah received one final text of the day. It was from Emma. Parents are home. Told them everything. Dad wants to shake your hand, and Mom wants to adopt you. Thank you for everything. Sarah set her phone aside and reflected on how much her life had changed in just a few days. She had come to Millbrook looking for peace and quiet while she figured out her next move. Instead, She had found a purpose that felt remarkably similar to what she had left behind in the military. The mission was still the same: protect the innocent and stand against those who would prey on the weak. The only difference was the uniform and the location. Some things, Sarah realized, transcended geography and military service. Some things were simply about being the kind of person who was willing to do what was right, regardless of the personal cost. As she fell asleep that night, Sarah felt more at peace than she had since returning from Afghanistan. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new decisions about her future. But, for the first time in months, she was confident that she was moving in the right direction. The meeting with Colonel Harrison could not come soon enough. Colonel James Harrison looked exactly as Sarah remembered him from their last meeting in Afghanistan 18 months ago. Tall, gray-haired, and carrying himself with the quiet authority that came from 30 years of military service. He sat across from her in the corner booth of a small cafe 50 miles outside Millbrook. The location had been his choice, and Sarah understood why. This was not the kind of conversation that should be overheard by casual eavesdroppers. "You look good, Martinez," Harrison said, studying her face carefully. "Civilian life seems to be agreeing with you." Sarah smiled slightly. "It's had its interesting moments. Your timing for reaching out couldn't have been better." "So I heard," Harrison replied, pulling a thin folder from his briefcase. "Word travels fast in our community. A Navy SEAL taking down 4 men in a small-town diner tends to get noticed." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "How did you hear about that?" "Because we've been watching Jake Morrison and his associates for the better part of 6 months, Harrison said, opening the folder to reveal surveillance photos and detailed reports. "What you stumbled into was much bigger than a few drunk men harassing a waitress." The photos spread across the table showed Jake and his 3 friends, but also several other men Sarah did not recognize. There were images of them meeting in parking lots, exchanging packages, and entering buildings that looked like warehouses or storage facilities. "I don't understand," Sarah said, studying the photos more carefully. "What does this have to do with what happened at Murphy's Diner?" Harrison leaned back in his chair, his expression growing serious. "Jake Morrison and his crew are part of a larger network that's been trafficking weapons and drugs through small towns across the Midwest. They use intimidation and violence to control local businesses, forcing them to serve as fronts for money laundering and distribution points." Sarah felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place in her mind. The diner. They weren't just harassing Emma because they could. They were trying to establish control. Exactly. Murphy's Diner is perfectly positioned along Interstate 70, with easy access for vehicles traveling between major cities. The plan was to gradually escalate pressure on Bill Murphy until he agreed to let them use his establishment for their operations. A young waitress refusing to tolerate their harassment wasn't part of their timeline. Harrison pulled out another set of photos, these ones showing the exterior and interior of Murphy's Diner from angles that suggested professional surveillance. They had been casing the place for weeks, documenting staff schedules, customer patterns, and security measures. Emma was just the most vulnerable target they could use to start applying pressure. Sarah studied the surveillance photos with growing alarm. "How long has this been going on?" "The network has been operating for about 3 years, but they only moved into this region about 8 months ago. Local law enforcement has been largely ineffective because the crimes cross multiple jurisdictions, and the perpetrators are careful to stay below the radar of federal agencies. Until a Navy SEAL decided to interfere with their recruitment process," Sarah said, beginning to understand the larger implications of what had happened. Harrison nodded. "Your intervention disrupted their timeline and exposed their operation to unwanted attention. More importantly, it demonstrated that they could be stood up to successfully, which undermines their entire model of intimidation-based control." Sarah leaned forward, her tactical mind now fully engaged. "What kind of weapons are we talking about? And how extensive is the network?" "Small arms primarily, but also explosives and military-grade equipment that's been diverted from legitimate sources. As for the network, we estimate at least 40 active members spread across 5 states, with connections to larger criminal organizations in Chicago and Detroit." Harrison produced a map marked with red pins scattered across Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Missouri, and Iowa. Each pin represented a known or suspected operation, and Sarah was disturbed to see how many small towns were involved. The pattern is always the same, Harrison continued. They identify businesses in strategic locations, usually family-owned operations that are struggling financially or vulnerable to pressure. They start with harassment and intimidation, escalate to property damage and threats of violence, and eventually force the owners to cooperate or sell out entirely. And local law enforcement can't stop them? Local police are often outgunned and don't have the resources for this kind of investigation. County sheriffs are spread too thin, and federal agencies have bigger priorities. These guys have figured out how to operate in the gaps between jurisdictions. Sarah was quiet for several minutes, absorbing the implications of what Harrison had told her. What she had thought was a simple case of bullies getting their comeuppance was actually her accidentally disrupting a sophisticated criminal operation. "What kind of position are you offering?" she asked finally. Harrison smiled for the first time since the conversation had begun. "We're putting together a special task force to take down networks like this one. Small teams of highly skilled operators working with federal law enforcement agencies to identify and neutralize threats that fall between the cracks of traditional jurisdiction." Domestic operations, Sarah clarified. Domestic operations with the full backing of the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI. You would have federal law enforcement authority and access to resources that local agencies can only dream of. Sarah studied the map again, counting the red pins and imagining how many innocent business owners were living in fear because of men like Jake Morrison. What happened after the diner incident? Are they still operating? "That's where things get interesting," Harrison said, pulling out another folder. "Your friend Jake has gone underground. He hasn't been seen since you had your conversation with him outside Emma's house 3 days ago. His associates are scrambling, trying to figure out what kind of law enforcement attention they might have attracted." "I didn't identify myself as law enforcement," Sarah said. "I let them think I was just a veteran with good training." Which was smart, because it's given us an opportunity. They're confused and off balance, which makes them more likely to make mistakes. We've been able to gather more intelligence in the last 3 days than in the previous 3 months. Harrison spread out additional surveillance photos showing men in animated conversations, hastily arranged meetings, and what appeared to be the movement of materials from one location to another. They're reorganizing, which means we have a window to take them down before they can establish new operating procedures. Sarah felt the familiar excitement that came with planning a complex operation against a dangerous enemy. This was what she had been trained for, what she had spent years perfecting. The fact that she would be protecting American communities rather than foreign civilians did not make the mission any less important. "What's the timeline?" she asked. "We want to move quickly while they're still disrupted. Full operational authority would take a few weeks to process, but we could have you working as a consultant within days." "Working how?" "Undercover." Harrison shook his head. "Nothing that deep. We need someone who can move freely in small communities, assess threats, and coordinate with local law enforcement when federal intervention is necessary. Think of it as community policing with a very specific focus and much better resources." The concept appealed to Sarah more than she had expected. It combined the tactical challenges she thrived on with the community connection she had discovered she valued after helping Emma. "What about backup? I assume I wouldn't be working alone." Each team consists of 3 operatives with complementary skill sets, supported by a full intelligence and logistics team. You would be the team leader for this region, with 2 other operators I think you'll find very familiar. Harrison handed her a final folder, this one containing personnel files for 2 people Sarah recognized immediately. Lieutenant Commander Michael Torres had been her demolitions expert during her last deployment, a quiet professional with an uncanny ability to make things explode at exactly the right moment. Sergeant First Class Diana Kim had been one of the best intelligence analysts Sarah had ever worked with, someone who could find patterns in chaos and predict enemy behavior with remarkable accuracy. "Torres and Kim," Sarah said with genuine pleasure. "I thought Torres was still active duty." He was, until a training accident damaged his knee badly enough to end his operational career. He's looking for a way to continue serving that doesn't require him to meet full physical standards. And Kim completed her enlistment 6 months ago and has been working as a private contractor. She's eager to get back to real operations rather than sitting behind a desk analyzing other people's missions. Sarah felt a surge of confidence as she imagined working with two people she trusted completely. The prospect of leading a team again, of having a clear mission with meaningful objectives, was exactly what she had been missing since leaving active duty. "There's something else," Harrison said, his tone becoming more serious. "The Jake Morrison network isn't the biggest threat we're tracking. It's part of a larger pattern of criminal organizations taking advantage of gaps in rural law enforcement coverage. We think there are at least a dozen similar operations in different parts of the country." He produced a larger map showing the entire United States, with clusters of red pins scattered across rural and small-town areas that were far from major metropolitan centers. The scope of the problem was much larger than Sarah had imagined. The goal is to create a national task force capability that can respond to these threats wherever they emerge. What you've accomplished here in Millbrook would be the proof of concept for operations nationwide. Sarah studied the national map, thinking about all the small towns and rural communities represented by those red pins. How many business owners were being intimidated? How many young women like Emma were being harassed and threatened? How many local communities were being corrupted by criminal networks that operated with impunity because they were too small to attract federal attention, but too sophisticated for local law enforcement to handle alone? "When do you need an answer?" she asked. "Yesterday," Harrison said with a slight smile. "But I understand this is a big decision. How about you take the weekend to think it over? We can meet again on Monday to discuss details if you're interested." Sarah was quiet for several minutes, weighing the pros and cons of returning to operational duty. The appeal was obvious. Meaningful work using skills she had spent years developing, the chance to protect communities that had limited options for protecting themselves, and the opportunity to lead a team of operators she knew and trusted. The concerns were equally obvious. The danger inherent in confronting organized criminal networks, the challenge of operating in domestic territory with different rules and constraints than overseas combat zones, and the uncertainty about how this new organization would function within the existing law enforcement structure. But as she thought about Emma's frightened voice on the phone, about Bill Murphy's gratitude for finally having someone stand up to the men who had been terrorizing his customers, and about all the other communities represented by pins on Harrison's map, the decision became clear. "I don't need the weekend," Sarah said. "When do I start?" Harrison's smile widened into a genuine grin. "I was hoping you'd say that. How does tomorrow morning sound? We've got a safe house set up about an hour from here where you can meet your team and get briefed on current intelligence." "That works for me. What about my situation here in Millbrook? Should I maintain my cover as a retired veteran?" "For now, yes. The beauty of this position is that your cover is essentially the truth. You are a retired veteran who's chosen to make a home in a small town. The fact that you're also a federal operative working to protect small communities from criminal networks is just not something that needs to be widely advertised." Harrison began gathering the photos and documents spread across the table. "There is one more thing, Martinez. This job comes with significant autonomy and minimal supervision. You'll be making decisions in the field that could affect entire communities. Are you comfortable with that level of responsibility?" Sarah thought about her years as a SEAL team leader, about the split-second decisions that had meant the difference between mission success and failure, between life and death for her team members and the people they had been sent to protect. This was not fundamentally different, just a different battlefield with different rules. "I'm comfortable with it," she said, "as long as I have the resources and authority to do the job right." "You'll have both," Harrison assured her. "Federal law enforcement authority, access to intelligence resources, and a budget that allows you to operate effectively. The only constraint is that everything you do has to be legal and constitutional. We're not operating in a combat zone anymore." Sarah understood the distinction and appreciated Harrison's emphasis on it. Domestic operations required a different mindset and different tactics than overseas combat missions. The enemy was still dangerous, but the rules of engagement were much more restrictive. "I understand," she said. "Legal and constitutional, but within those boundaries, whatever it takes to protect the communities." "Exactly." Harrison stood and extended his hand. "Welcome to the task force, Commander Martinez." Sarah shook his hand, feeling a sense of purpose and direction that had been missing since her return from Afghanistan. "Thank you for the opportunity, sir. I won't let you down." As they walked toward their vehicles in the parking lot, Harrison handed her a business card with an address and a time written on the back. Tomorrow morning at 9. Ask for Agent Rebecca Chun when you arrive. She'll be your liaison with the FBI and will help coordinate with local law enforcement when necessary. Sarah pocketed the card and climbed into her truck, feeling energized in a way she had not experienced in months. As she drove back toward Millbrook, her mind was already working through tactical considerations for confronting the criminal network that had been operating in her new community. The town looked different to her now as she drove through the downtown area. Instead of seeing it as a quiet place where she could decompress from military service, she now saw it as territory that needed to be protected from a sophisticated enemy. Every business could be a potential target. Every family could be at risk from the kind of intimidation and violence that Jake Morrison represented. But Sarah was no longer just a retired veteran trying to find her place in civilian life. She was a federal operative with the training, authority, and resources to fight back against the people who preyed on small communities. As she pulled into her driveway, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from Emma. Saw on the news that someone broke into Miller's Hardware last night. Nothing taken, but place was trashed. Reminded me of what you said about Jake's friends. Should I be worried? Sarah stared at the message for a long moment. Miller's Hardware was 2 blocks from Murphy's Diner, another family-owned business in exactly the kind of strategic location that would appeal to criminals looking for money laundering fronts. She typed back quickly. Probably just coincidence, but keep your eyes open. Call me if you notice anything unusual. But Sarah did not believe it was coincidence. The break-in at Miller's Hardware sounded exactly like the kind of intimidation tactic Harrison had described. The network was adapting to the disruption she had caused, looking for new targets and new ways to establish control. The game was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. Sarah smiled grimly as she unlocked her apartment door. Tomorrow she would officially become part of the task force, but tonight she was going to do some reconnaissance of her own. If Jake Morrison's associates thought they could continue operating in Millbrook, they were about to learn how wrong they were. The hunt was on. The final strike's 6 weeks had passed since Sarah Martinez joined the federal task force, and the investigation into the criminal network had yielded more intelligence than anyone had expected. Working with her reunited team of Michael Torres and Diana Kim, Sarah had methodically dismantled the network's operations across 3 states, following a trail of evidence that led from small-town businesses all the way to major criminal organizations in Chicago. The break in the case had come when Diana's analysis revealed that Jake Morrison was not just a low-level enforcer, but the nephew of Marcus Morrison, a high-ranking member of one of Chicago's most powerful crime families. The small-town intimidation operations were part of a larger strategy to establish rural distribution networks that would be invisible to federal law enforcement agencies focused on major metropolitan areas. Now, as Sarah sat in an unmarked van parked outside an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Millbrook, she was preparing for the operation that would bring the entire network down. Intelligence gathered over the past month had revealed that tonight was the night of a major weapons transfer, with representatives from Chicago arriving to meet with local distributors and plan the expansion into 2 additional states. Radio check, came Torres's voice through her earpiece. Ghost 1 in position. Ghost 2 in position, Diana's voice followed. All surveillance equipment active and recording. Sarah keyed her radio. Ghost 3 in position. Federal backup units. Report status. FBI Unit 1 in position 2 blocks east. Came the reply from Agent Rebecca Chun, who had become both Sarah's liaison and a trusted partner over the past weeks. FBI Unit 2 in position on Interstate Access Road. Local SWAT team standing by at Rally Point. Sarah checked her watch. 11:47 p.m. Intelligence suggested the meeting was scheduled for midnight, giving them 13 minutes to confirm that all participants had arrived before initiating the takedown. Through her night vision scope, Sarah could see movement inside the warehouse as vehicles continued to arrive. The past 6 weeks had been a whirlwind of activity that reminded Sarah why she had loved special operations so much. The combination of detailed intelligence work, strategic planning, and tactical execution required every skill she had developed during her military career. More importantly, it was all in service of protecting communities that had limited ability to protect themselves. The network had been much larger and more sophisticated than initial intelligence had suggested. In addition to Jake Morrison's crew, there were at least 30 other operatives spread across Illinois, Indiana, and Missouri. They had corrupted or intimidated business owners in over a dozen small towns, established weapons caches in rural areas where they would not attract attention, and created a distribution network that could move both illegal weapons and drugs through the heartland of America with minimal risk of detection. But they had made one critical mistake. They had underestimated the determination and capabilities of local communities when those communities had proper support and leadership. Working with Agent Chun, Sarah had developed relationships with business owners, local law enforcement officials, and community leaders who had been living in fear of the network's intimidation tactics. Rather than simply conducting a federal investigation that would eventually result in arrests, they had empowered local communities to resist and fight back. Bill Murphy had been one of their first and most valuable allies. Once he understood that he was dealing with organized criminals rather than just local troublemakers, he had agreed to install surveillance equipment in his diner and to document every attempted intimidation. The intelligence gathered had been crucial in mapping the network structure and identifying key players. Emma, despite her youth, had proven to be an invaluable asset as well. Her job as a waitress gave her access to conversations that might have been guarded around obvious law enforcement personnel, and her natural intelligence and observational skills had helped identify several network members who had not been on the federal radar. The most satisfying aspect of the operation had been watching small communities rediscover their own strength and resilience when given the tools and support to fight back. Business owners who had been living in fear for months began cooperating with each other, sharing information and coordinating resistance to intimidation attempts. Local law enforcement agencies that had felt overwhelmed began working together across jurisdictional boundaries, pooling resources and expertise to confront a threat that was bigger than any one department could handle alone. Ghost 3, we have movement on the north side of the building. Torres's voice crackled through the radio. 3 vehicles just arrived, Illinois plates. Looks like our Chicago friends are here. Sarah adjusted her scope and confirmed the sighting. 3 black SUVs with tinted windows had pulled up to the warehouse loading dock, and several men in expensive suits were getting out. The contrast with Jake Morrison's crew of local thugs was immediately obvious. These were professional criminals with resources and connections that extended far beyond small-town intimidation. Ghost 2, are you getting this? Sarah asked. Affirmative, Diana replied. Facial recognition is running now. I've got at least 2 positive matches to known associates of the Morrison crime family. The significance of those identifications could not be overstated. For months, federal agencies had been trying to gather evidence linking the Morrison family to criminal activities outside of Chicago. Tonight's operation would provide that evidence and potentially open up investigations into dozens of other criminal enterprises. All units, prepare for execute phase, Sarah commanded. Wait for my signal. Through her scope, Sarah watched as the last of the participants entered the warehouse. According to Diana's count, there were now at least 20 people inside, representing both the local network and the Chicago organization. If the intelligence was accurate, they were about to witness the transfer of enough weapons to supply criminal organizations across half the Midwest. Ghost 3, I'm picking up electronic surveillance countermeasures from inside the building, Diana reported. They're jamming cell phone signals and scanning for recording devices. Sarah was not surprised. The Chicago representatives would not have survived in their business without being paranoid about law enforcement surveillance. But their countermeasures were designed to defeat conventional law enforcement techniques, not military-grade equipment operated by former special operations personnel. Can you maintain communications with the surveillance package? Affirmative. Military frequencies are unaffected, and the hardened equipment is still functioning normally. At exactly midnight, Sarah gave the signal to begin the final phase of the operation. All units, execute, execute, execute. What followed was a precisely coordinated takedown that demonstrated why the combination of special operations expertise and federal law enforcement authority was so effective. Sarah and her team approached the warehouse from 3 different directions, using night vision equipment and suppressed weapons to neutralize external security without alerting the people inside. Meanwhile, FBI units moved into position to block all possible escape routes, while local SWAT teams prepared to provide backup if the situation escalated beyond what the primary teams could handle. Sarah reached the main entrance of the warehouse just as Torres confirmed that the loading dock was secure. Through a small window, she could see the meeting in progress. Jake Morrison was standing near a table covered with various weapons, obviously trying to impress his Chicago guests with the scope of his operation. The irony was not lost on Sarah. The man who had thought he could intimidate a teenage waitress with impunity was now trying to present himself as a serious criminal worth partnering with major organized crime figures. Ghost 1 and 2, prepare for entry, Sarah whispered into her radio. On my count. 3, 2, 1, go. The warehouse doors burst open simultaneously from 3 different points as Sarah and her team made their entry. The tactical lights mounted on their weapons turned the darkened warehouse into a brilliant display of confusion and panic as 20 criminals suddenly found themselves surrounded by federal agents. Federal agents. Nobody move. Get on the ground now. The response was immediate and varied. Several of the local criminals, led by Jake Morrison, immediately dropped to the floor and raised their hands, apparently deciding that compliance was their best option for survival. The Chicago representatives, however, had different ideas. One of the men in suits was reaching for a weapon concealed under his jacket when Torres put him down with a non-lethal shot from his taser. Another tried to run toward a rear exit, only to find Diana waiting for him with her pistol drawn and a very unfriendly expression on her face. The exception was a large man with graying hair who Sarah recognized from intelligence photos as Vincent Morrison, Marcus Morrison's younger brother and the operational leader of this expansion effort. Instead of surrendering, he grabbed Jake by the collar and pressed a pistol to his nephew's head. Back off, Vincent shouted, his voice echoing through the warehouse. I'll kill him. Sarah kept her weapon trained on Vincent while moving slowly to her left, trying to get an angle where she could take him down without risking harm to Jake. Despite everything Jake had done, he was still an American citizen who deserved protection under the law. Mr. Morrison, there's nowhere to go, Sarah called out, her voice calm and professional. The building is surrounded, and you're outnumbered 20-1. Let your nephew go, and nobody has to get hurt. You don't understand who you're dealing with, Vincent replied, his grip tightening on Jake. The Morrison family has connections you can't imagine. This won't stick. Sarah continued moving, noting that Torres was also repositioning for a clear shot, while Diana maintained her position covering the other prisoners. The tactical coordination that had made them an effective SEAL team was still intact, even in this very different environment. Maybe your connections will help you in court, Sarah said, but right now you're holding a federal agent at gunpoint in front of 20 witnesses and multiple recording devices. That's not going to end well regardless of who your family knows. Vincent's confidence wavered slightly as he realized the truth of what Sarah was saying. Even if he escaped this immediate situation, which was highly unlikely, the evidence against him was overwhelming and undeniable. Last chance, Mr. Morrison. Let him go. Instead of releasing Jake, Vincent made the mistake of trying to use him as a human shield while moving toward one of the warehouse exits. The movement gave Sarah the angle she needed. Her shot was perfect, striking Vincent in the shoulder and spinning him away from Jake without causing permanent injury. Jake collapsed to the floor, shaking but unharmed, while Vincent's pistol skittered across the concrete floor. Target down. All suspects secured, Sarah announced as FBI agents flooded into the warehouse to begin processing the arrests. Agent Chin appeared at Sarah's side, surveying the scene with obvious satisfaction. Outstanding work. We've got enough evidence here to prosecute not just the local network, but the Morrison family's entire expansion operation. Sarah holstered her weapon and looked around the warehouse at the weapons, drugs, and cash that had been seized. The operation had been a complete success, but, more importantly, it represented something larger than just law enforcement success. What's the status on the other operations? Sarah asked. Task forces in Indiana and Missouri executed simultaneously, Chen replied. Total arrests across all 3 states, 67 suspects, including 8 members of the Morrison family organization. We've effectively dismantled their entire rural expansion network. Over the following hours, as the warehouse was processed and suspects were transported to federal holding facilities, Sarah found herself thinking about the broader implications of what they had accomplished. This had been more than just a law enforcement operation. It had been a demonstration that small communities were not helpless against organized criminal networks, provided they had proper support and leadership. More importantly, it had shown that federal resources could be effectively deployed to protect rural and small-town America without waiting for criminal problems to become large enough to attract national attention. The next morning, Sarah sat in Murphy's diner drinking coffee with Emma, Bill Murphy, and several other local business owners who had supported the operation. The atmosphere was celebratory, but also reflective, as everyone understood that this was both an ending and a beginning. So what happens next? Bill asked. Do you think they'll try to come back? Sarah shook her head. The Morrison family has bigger problems to worry about now. Federal prosecutors are using the evidence from last night to open investigations into their operations in Chicago, Detroit, and several other major cities. They won't have the resources or the attention to spare for small-town expansion for a very long time. And what about you? Emma asked. Are you staying in Millbrook? The question was one Sarah had been thinking about since the operation ended. Her official assignment to the task force would continue, but the specific threat to this community had been eliminated. There would be other criminal networks in other small towns that needed the same kind of attention and resources. I'll be around for a while longer, Sarah said. There are still loose ends to tie up, court cases to prepare for, and other communities that could use our help. But Millbrook will always be home base. Bill smiled broadly. That's the best news I've heard in months. This place felt like home the moment you walked in, and I'm glad it's going to stay that way. As the conversation continued, Sarah reflected on how much her life had changed since that first evening when she had simply wanted a quiet meal and instead found herself confronting a criminal network. She had rediscovered her sense of purpose, reconnected with trusted teammates, and found a way to serve her country that felt as meaningful as anything she had done in the military. The mission was different now, focused on protecting American communities rather than fighting overseas enemies. But the core principles remained the same. Protect the innocent, stand against those who would prey on the weak, and never back down when doing the right thing required personal risk. Later that afternoon, Sarah received a call from Colonel Harrison. Congratulations on a successful operation, he said. The success in your region has generated a lot of interest at the highest levels of government. They want to expand the task force program nationwide. What does that mean for our team? It means you'll be training other teams to do what you've done in Millbrook. We're looking at establishing task forces in every federal region, all using the model you've developed of combining special operations expertise with community engagement. Sarah felt a surge of excitement at the prospect. The idea that their success could be replicated in communities across the country was more rewarding than any personal recognition could have been. When do we start? Harrison laughed. I was hoping you'd ask that. How does next month sound? We've got a training facility being established in Virginia where you and your team can develop the curriculum for other operators. That works for me. What about Torres and Kim? They're both eager to continue. Torres has some ideas about adapting our tactical approaches for different types of criminal networks, and Kim wants to develop better intelligence sharing protocols between federal agencies and local law enforcement. As Sarah ended the call, she walked outside and looked down the main street of Millbrook. The town looked peaceful and normal, with families shopping and children playing in the small park near the library. It was hard to believe that just a few months ago, this community had been under siege by organized criminals who thought they could operate with impunity. Emma appeared beside her, having finished her shift at the diner. You look thoughtful. Everything okay? Everything's perfect, Sarah replied. I was just thinking about how much can change when people are willing to stand up for what's right. Speaking of standing up, Emma said with a grin, I wanted to tell you something. I've been accepted to college for next fall, but I've also decided to apply to the Naval Academy. I want to serve my country like you did. Sarah felt a surge of pride mixed with concern. That's a big decision, Emma. Are you sure you're ready for that kind of commitment? I've been thinking about it since that first night at the diner. You showed me that one person can make a real difference, but you also showed me that the military can be a way to serve something bigger than yourself. I want to be part of that. Sarah studied the young woman's face and saw the same determination she remembered from her own decision to join the Navy years ago. The Naval Academy is extremely competitive, and military service isn't for everyone. But if you're serious about it, I'd be happy to help you with your application. Emma's face lit up. Really? That would be amazing. As they walked back toward the diner, Sarah realized that her influence on this community would extend far beyond the criminal network she had helped dismantle. Emma's decision to pursue military service was just one example of how acts of courage could inspire others to take action in their own lives. Over the following weeks, as Sarah prepared for her new role training other task force teams, she received regular updates on the prosecution of the Morrison network. Vincent Morrison and 6 other high-ranking family members had been indicted on federal charges that could result in life sentences. Jake Morrison had agreed to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence, providing information that was leading to additional arrests and the seizure of millions of dollars in criminal assets. More importantly, the successful takedown of the network was having ripple effects throughout the region. Other small communities were reaching out to federal agencies, reporting suspicious activities, and asking for help with problems they had previously thought they would have to handle alone. The message was clear. Small towns were no longer easy targets for organized crime. The most gratifying development came when Sarah received a letter from a business owner in a small town in Iowa. He had read about the Millbrook operation in the newspaper and wanted her to know that it had inspired him to contact the FBI about a group of men who had been pressuring him to let them use his trucking company for undisclosed purposes. The FBI investigation that resulted from his report had led to the arrest of 12 people and the disruption of a drug distribution network that had been operating for over 2 years. One person willing to stand up can change everything, Sarah said to Torres as they reviewed the letter together. They were in the temporary office they had set up in a converted storefront downtown, preparing materials for the training program they would soon be implementing. It's bigger than that, Torres replied. It's about showing people that they don't have to face these problems alone. When communities know they have backup, they're much more likely to fight back. Diana looked up from the computer where she was analyzing crime statistics from across the Midwest. The numbers are already showing the impact. Reported intimidation of small businesses is down 30% in the region, and cooperation with law enforcement investigations is up almost 50%. Sarah felt a deep satisfaction as she contemplated those statistics. Each number represented real people who were living with less fear, families who felt safer in their own communities, and businesses that could operate without the threat of criminal interference. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah received a surprise visitor. Agent Chen knocked on the office door and entered with a man Sarah did not recognize, a tall, distinguished individual in a well-tailored suit who carried himself with obvious authority. "Sarah, I'd like you to meet Deputy Director Frank Sullivan from the Department of Homeland Security," Chen said. "He wanted to personally thank you for the success of the Millbrook operation." Sullivan stepped forward and shook Sarah's hand firmly. "Commander Martinez, what you've accomplished here has gotten attention all the way to the White House. The President wants to make the task force program a national priority, with significant funding and resources." "Thank you, sir. But I want to make sure the focus remains on protecting small communities rather than building a large bureaucracy." Sullivan smiled. "That's exactly the kind of attitude we're looking for. The plan is to keep the team small and focused, with maximum operational autonomy and minimal administrative overhead. We want to replicate what you've done here, not complicate it." He handed Sarah a folder containing what appeared to be official documents. "This is your authorization to establish and command the National Rural Security Task Force. You'll have the authority to recruit personnel, establish operating procedures, and coordinate with any federal, state, or local agency as needed." Sarah opened the folder and found herself looking at credentials that gave her broader authority than she had possessed even during her most sensitive military operations. The responsibility was both exciting and sobering. "What's the timeline for implementation?" she asked. "We want the first 6 regional teams operational within 90 days, Sullivan replied. "After that, we'll assess the results and plan for further expansion. The goal is to have national coverage within 2 years." As Sullivan and Chen departed, Sarah shared the news with Torres and Diana. The reaction was immediate enthusiasm mixed with recognition of the enormous challenge they were accepting. 6 teams in 90 days, Torres mused. That's going to require some very careful selection of personnel and some intensive training. The good news is that we've already proven the concept works, Diana added. We don't have to guess about tactics or procedures. We know what's effective. Sarah nodded, but she was also thinking about the broader implications of what they were undertaking. Success in Millbrook had been possible because of the specific circumstances they had encountered and the relationships they had been able to build with local communities. Replicating that success on a national scale would require adapting their approach to very different situations and challenges. That evening, as Sarah walked through downtown Millbrook, she encountered Emma leaving the library with an armload of books about naval history and military leadership. The sight made Sarah smile, remembering her own enthusiasm when she had first decided to pursue a military career. Studying hard? Sarah asked. Trying to prepare for the academy interviews, Emma replied. I want to make sure I understand what I'm getting into. That's smart. Military service can be incredibly rewarding, but it's not a decision to make lightly. Emma was quiet for a moment, then looked directly at Sarah. Can I ask you something personal? Do you ever regret leaving the SEALs? The question touched on something Sarah had been thinking about frequently since joining the task force. Her military career had been the defining experience of her adult life, shaping her values, her skills, and her understanding of what it meant to serve something larger than herself. I don't regret leaving, Sarah said finally. But I think I would have regretted it if I hadn't found another way to serve. The uniform changes, but the mission stays the same. Protect people who need protection and stand up to those who would harm the innocent. Emma nodded thoughtfully. That's what I want to do too. I want to make a difference like you did. You already are making a difference, Sarah pointed out. Your courage in standing up to those men at the diner, your willingness to help with the investigation, your decision to pursue service, all of that matters. As they parted ways, Sarah continued her walk through the quiet streets of Millbrook. The town that had seemed like just a place to decompress and figure out her next move had become something much more significant. The proving ground for a new approach to protecting American communities from organized crime. The task ahead was daunting. Training teams of operators, coordinating with dozens of federal agencies, building relationships with thousands of small communities across the country. It would require every skill Sarah had developed during her military career and some she had not yet learned. But as she thought about Emma's determination to serve, about Bill Murphy's gratitude for finally having someone stand up to the criminals who had been terrorizing his customers, and about all the other small towns represented by pins on Colonel Harrison's map, Sarah felt confident that the mission was worth whatever challenges lay ahead. The next morning brought news that reinforced Sarah's conviction about the importance of their work. Diana had intercepted communications suggesting that criminal networks in at least 3 other states were accelerating their own expansion plans, apparently trying to establish operations before federal task forces could be deployed to stop them. They're adapting faster than we expected, Diana reported. Word about what happened here has spread through criminal networks nationwide. They know they have a limited window before we can respond effectively to new threats. Sarah studied the intelligence reports, noting the locations where new criminal activity was being detected. Rural communities in Montana, Arkansas, and North Carolina were showing signs of the same intimidation tactics that had been used in Millbrook. How quickly can we get teams deployed to those areas? She asked. Torres looked up from the training materials he was developing. With emergency authorization, we could have advanced teams in place within a week. But they'd be operating with minimal backup and limited local support. That's a risk we may have to take, Sarah decided. The longer we wait, the more entrenched these networks become. Agent Chun, who had been monitoring communications with other federal agencies, provided additional context. FBI field offices in those regions are requesting immediate assistance. Local law enforcement is feeling overwhelmed, and business owners are starting to report intimidation incidents. Sarah made the decision that would define the next phase of her career. We're going to accelerate the deployment timeline. I'll take a team to Montana personally while Torres and Diana handle Arkansas and North Carolina. We'll develop training protocols in the field and refine our procedures based on real-world experience. The plan was ambitious and risky, but it was also necessary. Criminal networks were not going to wait for perfect training programs or ideal operating conditions. They were moving aggressively to establish dominance in rural areas before effective opposition could be organized. Over the following week, Sarah found herself preparing for a mission that felt remarkably similar to the deployments she had made as a SEAL, despite being on domestic soil. She would be entering unfamiliar territory to confront a dangerous enemy, with limited local support and uncertain intelligence about the scope of the threat. The difference was that this time, she would not just be protecting American interests abroad. She would be protecting American communities at home, small towns where families lived and worked and raised their children with the expectation that they would be safe from the kind of organized criminal violence that most people associated with big cities or foreign countries. As Sarah packed her equipment and prepared to leave Millbrook for her first deployment as commander of the National Rural Security Task Force, she reflected on how much her life had changed since that first evening at Murphy's Diner. She had come here looking for peace and quiet while she figured out her next move. Instead, she had found a new mission that felt as important and meaningful as anything she had done in the military. The final validation came in the form of a farewell gathering at Murphy's Diner, where it seemed like half the town had come to wish her well. Bill Murphy presented her with a key to the city, an honor that the mayor had suggested, but that meant more to Sarah coming from the man whose business had been the first target of the criminal network. Emma, now sporting a Naval Academy preparatory program acceptance letter, made a short speech thanking Sarah for showing her what it meant to serve with courage and integrity. The applause that followed was genuine and heartfelt, representing a community's gratitude for someone who had been willing to stand up when standing up mattered most. As Sarah drove out of Millbrook the next morning, heading toward an uncertain mission in Montana, she carried with her the knowledge that her decision to intervene in what had seemed like a simple case of harassment had ultimately changed not just her own life, but the lives of countless other people in small communities across America. The men who had thought they could intimidate Emma with impunity had learned the hard way that some people could not be intimidated, could not be bullied, and would not stand by while innocent people were threatened. They had discovered what enemies of America had learned in conflicts around the world. When you cross a Navy SEAL, you get exactly what you deserve. But, more importantly, they had learned that America's small towns and rural communities were not defenseless targets waiting to be exploited. They were home to people who valued courage, community, and justice. And when those people had proper leadership and support, they were capable of standing up to any threat. The mission continued, but the message was clear. Those who preyed on the innocent would find that their victims were not as helpless as they appeared, and that somewhere, someone trained to protect the weak was always watching, always ready, and always willing to do whatever it took to ensure that justice prevailed. Sarah Martinez had found her purpose again, and America's small communities were safer because of it.